So a moment ago I promised you an example where we would find the domain of a composite function where we had some more interesting functions to begin with. So here it is, example 2. Example 2, suppose f of x is equal to x divided by x plus 3 and g of x is equal to 2 divided by x. Find the domain of f composed with g. Now I've written on the board once again the same information that I had a moment ago when we were looking at the domain in example 1. So first off, f composed with g of x, definition f of g of x, and I've written the words again. Include any x values that are not in the domain of g, and then for which g of x is not in the domain of f. So let's go ahead and see what we can see then. So first off, I need to talk about the domain of g, because again, you start on the inside and you work your way out. So I'm going to come to my function g over here. Well, as you look at g, no square roots, so I don't have to worry about those, but this it does involve division, and it involves division where we have an x in the denominator. So there is one x value that we cannot use for that function g, the x value of 0. So my domain then is everybody else. So I'm going to choose to write this in set builder notation. The domain of g then is going to be the set of all x values such that x is not equal to 0. So now that I have that then, the next thing that they talk about is for which g of x is not in the domain of f. Well, as you read those words, I'm going to tear them apart, and I'm actually going to start at the end. I'm going to start with the domain of f. Oh, okay, let's figure that out then. So we have domain of f. Well, f is right here. We have the rule f of x is equal to x divided by x plus 3. Once again, no square roots, so don't have to worry about that. But there is an x value that would cause me issues here. The one x value that I cannot use on this problem is negative 3, because negative 3 would make my denominator 0. So the domain of f is the set of all x values such that x is not equal to negative 3. But now that we have that, let's go back on this statement a bit. It didn't say for which x is not in the domain of f. It said g of x can't be in the domain of f. So what we need to do then is take this piece of information and change it up a bit. I'm not interested in x values that are not equal to negative 3. I'm interested in g of x values that are not equal to negative 3, because I'm not giving an x to the function f, I'm giving a g of x to the function f. So what we now need to do then is take these two pieces of information and bring them together. My g of x cannot equal negative 3 in this particular composition. Well, now that I know that my g of x can't equal negative 3, I know a rule for g. The rule for g of x is 2 divided by x. So we have 2 divided by x, and I'm going to choose to come over here. 2 divided by x can't equal that negative 3. So what I'm going to do is think about this as an equation for a moment, and then once I think about it as an equation, I can solve for the x value that causes me issues. So I'm going to go ahead and change my not equal to into an equal while I'm doing this solution. So we have 2 divided by x equals negative 3 for the moment. Well, I can multiply both sides by the x, and I get 2 is equal to negative 3x, and then I can divide both sides by negative 3. That's 2 divided by negative 3 is equal to x. So the one x value that we cannot use is negative 2/3. So g of x can't equal negative 3, and that means then x can't equal negative 2/3. So now that I have those two pieces of information, I'm ready to write down the domain of f composed with g. So from step number 1, it says we need to exclude any of the x values that are not in the domain of g. Well, okay, I have that information right here. So step number 1 says we cannot use the x value of 0. So let's come over here and write down the domain of f composed with g. Well, it's going to be the set of all x values such that, and we're going to start off and say we can't use 0. But then step 2 says for which g of x is not in the domain of f. So the next piece that we need to exclude then is this x value of negative 2/3. So we'll come over here and say x can't be negative 2/3 either. So those are the two x values that this particular composition can't play with. F composed with g, when we think about the domain of it, we can't plug in an x value of 0, and we can't plug in an x value of negative 2/3.